Well, welcome everyone. Uh, Welcome to a Warhammer 10th edition battle report. Although I'm not sure how well this battle report actually is going. I am going to show the battle report, but also just take some time to discuss this in terms of, you know, what do I think about 10th edition as a Kings of War player, and what can we learn from 10th edition in their rule set, and say, are there some things about 10th edition that can, what I would think, maybe give us pause about our own rule set. So, yeah, let's go look at this. But yeah, this is me trying a 10th edition game. I want to also say that I actually was excited to play 10th edition. I had actually read up the army books. I've been a 40k fan for, really since second. But I had taken off 40k after sixth, whenever just a lot of changes happened that I didn't like. So I've really not played 40k for, it's probably getting almost 10 years. I played a little bit of ninth and really didn't like that one. Just was pretty overwhelmed about the complexity of the game. So, but for now, the first thing we're going to do is let's go into the battle report. So this is 1,500 points. I want to see again. This is it's my first game, and it's not a great battle report, but I hope you can get the gist of what's going on. I also want to say, just 40k, the game is not a good system to try to do battle reports in images. It's just very dynamic. There's a lot of rules overlap. There's a lot of stratagems and interrupts. It isn't a good game to do battle reports, unlike maybe Kings of War. Another thing is, I did miss a few slides when I was just trying to grasp what was going on. I really was in this big game, and we're going to get into that about why that is. But it really, 40k is just an absolutely overwhelming game. If you aren't just coming from that universe. So the other thing is that after the battle report, I want to give some thoughts on 40k from a Kings of War perspective, and I want, I want to take what I've had happen to me, which sounds a little dramatic, and think about that from a Kings of War perspective. So I want to also say something that my opponent, while I would say I do have some criticisms from 40k, I want to give my opponent credit. He's a great guy. He was very patient with me and tried to teach me the game. I went over to a local starter tournament, and I actually found that the people there were super cool. So I have only good things to say about the 40k community that I met. So just, I want to thank my opponent if he does happen to catch this. I really appreciate his patience and time, and he's a really cool guy. So let's go into the report though. So we're going to do the setup. So I'm playing my Grey Knights. And what I'm doing is I'm running two 10-man term squads. So I've got one of my 10-man squads here, and then I've got my leader with a side cannon. This is my other 10-man squad of Terminators. And then I have two 5-man squad of Purgations. These are basically heavy weapon guys who are going to shoot. So I think my army's pretty simple with a leader, a lot of troops, pretty balanced army. My Terminators can fight good in hand-to-hand and outside of it. Yeah, that's my Terminators. I went against a Custodes players, and yeah, my opponent did tell me. I guess it's a bit of a warning. He did tell me that Custodes was one of the more powerful armies in 40k, and it's very interesting that he used the word powerful. I think that coming from 40k, coming from Kings of War, my view on what's considered to be broken and what isn't and overpowered, I think it's just a lot more sensitive than your average 40k player. I had really forgot just how absolutely broken Games Workshop games were, and it's fascinating that I think a lot of 40k players just, I think, coming and being in that system, I think they just have they're much more tolerant of imbalance. That with me in Kings of War, I would say that, when you play a system like Kings of War, which is, I would say, overall relatively balanced, and then you go out to something like a Games Workshop 40k and just see a level of imbalance, which is just out of your mind. It really is very stark. So I played Custodes. These are one of the top armies, and I think, yeah, I mean, again, I look at this army, and we're going to go through it, and it is absolutely busted. But we'll go through that in a bit. I just wanted to kind of, it's just interesting him using the term kind of more powerful. And when I looked at it, I'm like, as I started playing this game, I was like, this is absolutely crazy. But let's look at it. Yeah. So he, just kind of going back, he has two of these teleporter insane Terminators. This is the real kicker of a squad. It's these little sisters. They're like these ladies with swords. And the whole thing with them is that like they're basically anti-psyker killers. I think that this unit, we'll get into that more, but I think this sort of unit is pretty bad to put in a game. That it's basically super broken against psychers. And I guess they were thinking that that's kind of what balances the unit, is that, hey, there's only a few psychers in each army. But when you play Grey Knights, which basically every one of my guys are psychers, this unit is just basically busted. He then has a smaller unit of them with guns. So he has two 4-man squads of these Terminators. So basically his Terminators are like my Terminators, but just better. And with each of these 4-man squads, he's got his leader in there, right? So what you're seeing here is you're basically seeing two separate 4-man squads with a leader in them to basically add some additional abilities. I think so. This guy really is a lot more in tune with the meta, and one of the things that's starkly different about my army and his, I brought one character and a lot of troops. I'm still thinking of things in Kings of War terms. He brought 5 characters. And that's, as we're going to get into that, that's really what you want to be doing in the game of 40K. You want to be bringing lots of characters, and we'll get into why. But he's bringing 5 characters. So he's got his Terminators, and they each are going to have a character with them. He's got 2 bikes. He then has another character that has a 2-man squad that is going to be going. That character is assigned to one of, so it's actually 3 squads. It's 1, 2, and then 3. And then he's got one of his characters, another of his characters, and he has a 3rd character. This is another character as well. So, I could try to get into the details, but honestly, it's just overwhelming to try to explain all the different characters. Believe me, it's just very... Yeah, it's very difficult for me I could spend so long even going to the details of his army, and I don't want to waste your time. So we played a scenario which I thought was very interesting, where we were playing, we were basically playing across. You have 5 objectives, they're preset, and in this one, what you're trying to do is, it's kind of like, it's called like almost like kickball, where if you are within 3 inches of this objective, you get to push it 6 inches. It's really fascinating objective. I do have to admit, this is a very interesting objective. I don't know how balanced it is, but it definitely is quirky in that basically the armies are going to be trying to move these objectives and kick them up and down the field. So I'd say it doesn't come into play because he basically murders me, but the objective is cool. So there you go. That's one objective. So this is 2. These are all along the center, and that's the far left one. And then this is on his side, right? So there's 3 up this center here. So what he does, he sets up wide. So he is we alternate activations. So here's one of his leaders with one of his Terminator squads. Here's another of his leaders, a 4-man squad with another of his Terminator squads. Here's another of his leaders with another 4-man Terminator squad with a leader. So you can see each of these Terminator squads have a leader with them. He then has his anti-psycho crazy people with a leader in them as well. And then on the far right, he's got kind of a scout unit. This is more of an objective holder unit, inexpensive, so it's pretty good too. So again, seeing just him set up, and I would say this, he was very good about going into his rules, and he very much intimidated me. I think he meant well, but like he just started running through rules, and like it's very interesting that like he basically intimidated. He started running through these line of special rules that he had. So I thought my rule was I don't know if I could even compete with him. So I actually just choose to set up in the center. And what I'm planning on doing is just kind of contesting these 4 objectives on this side. This objective, I basically just gave this flank up completely. So he has one of his units that'll be coming up to just grab this objective. I just give up on this objective. He does get a scout move. So the first thing he does scout up this unit. And then he also scouts up his sword master. So these are the anti-psyker sword crazy women that are just absolutely brutal against psychers. And hey, all my army is psychers. So yeah, this is just me setting up the terms. So this is the first turn. So in turn 1, I just move up my terms, and I'm just going to use some of my long-range shooting to shoot him. So I shoot, and I actually killed 2 of these Terminators here, which is a pretty good start. Those Terminators are tough, and then I do 1 wound to the others. These guys are pretty tough, but I do manage to do 1 wound to them. So bottom of 1. So it's his turn now. So the first thing he does, he moves up the bikes to grab one of the objectives, and he moves up his leader here with his other smaller Terminator squad. He then advances these 2 units. This unit was back here. He rolled a 6 to advance this unit. So in 40K, you can't advance and charge in the same turn. But his sisters also have +2 charge. So he moves up these units. Now me, I'm thinking he can't charge me with this unit, right? Because you can't advance and move on the same turn. And this is him just moving his sister squad up there. I know these girls are just going to be very difficult to deal with. But we'll get into why they're just so nasty. And then he has a second Terminator squad coming up here. And he just moves up his bolter squad here just to gain this objective. So we'll get into this a little bit. But he starts, this is where the game starts to just get a pretty tough. So he pops ability, right? Apparently, so he just has, and I'll go into this later, he uses his once per game ability to have a unit advance and charge on the same turn. And so I'm thinking, okay, this unit can't charge me. Well, he pops an ability, and actually they can charge me, and they can re-roll charge rolls. So he gets both of these guys in. All right, so at this point, he basically started to just choose a combination of special rules. So it's very difficult to even describe what he did, but basically we'll get into that later, that he activated a whole bunch of simple rules and stratagems to make his guys absolutely nonsense powerful, and just basically murdered my guys. The sisters as well were just absolutely crazy, and we'll get into that. So his sisters basically, they have a 3-up invulnerable save against anything that's psychic damage. Well, all my army has psychic damage, so these girls are rocking a 3-up invulnerable save. The second thing these girls do is that they have weapons that have devastating wounds. So every 6 they roll, it's a mortal wound, which means that you get no save against it. But they also have an anti-psyker on their blades. That means that 6-up becomes a 4-up. So these sisters were hitting me, and every 4+ they roll, we're doing automatic 2 mortal wounds. So these sister squad are just absolutely murdering my Terminators where I get no save against them. And then I find that I have a stratagem, right? Because mortal wounds I'm seeing are just pretty crazy, right? So I find a stratagem that lets me get mortal wounds on 6s. And so I throw some mortal wounds back into him. But wouldn't you know it, his army ability is a 4-up against mortal wounds, which is just bonkers. Like, mortal wounds in this game, I would say this, I've never liked Feats, because I've played some Age of Sigmar, and I'd say I've never liked mortal wounds. I think that they're just a bad feature of a game. Like, we play dice games, and if you're going to play dice games, you'd like to be able to roll for saves. And a lot of what Age of Sigmar came down to, and what I think 40K is going to come down to, is basically mortal wound spam, where you find things that can just do mortal wounds and you just ignore all of the saves of your opponent. So this is just one of those points that was very frustrating to me, that I am using a stratagem to get 6-up mortal wounds that he gets a 4+ save on, and yet he is getting 4+ mortal wounds on me, of which I get no save from. So it's just, yeah, this Psyker unit, it's just absolutely broken against armies that are Psychers. And this is a classic GW problem, to develop a unit that is ultra specialized against one type of unit, a Psyker, and then to have armies made up of Psychers. I just think that I think that as all Games Workshop, just there's so many things that just in playing this one game, you can like really tell that Games Workshop like didn't they weren't even trying to like balance these rules as a whole. They were just adding in crazy abilities and saying it's almost like each of these armies were developed in a complete vacuum from one another. So yeah, I got murdered here. So I did throw some wounds back, but as you can see, he's taken out half of this squad here. I did get a few wounds back, but the other thing is he has another stratagem that he can cast. So each of my hammers, my force weapons, do 2 damage, but he has another thing that he can do, which reduces my damage to 1 damage. So now I'm barely even wounding these Terminators. And so I really don't do well at all, and I've lost a lot of men. So that was a rough turn 1. Let's go to turn 2. So the first thing I do is I kind of move up all these guys, and I'm planning on shooting his men, and then I'm just going to charge these 2 units and try and kill them. So the first thing I do, but here's another thing. Right after I move, he uses another stratagem ability to teleport. In other words, the moment I move, he then teleports 2 of his Terminators behind my lines where I can't charge him. So it's another. It's one of those things that it's very frustrating that I always felt he can't, like every time I would do something, he immediately could just do something to screw me. It was, and like he was really good and he explained this stuff beforehand, but I want to give him credit. Like he actually took a lot of time to explain this stuff beforehand, but it was so many things to keep in mind that you kind of forget about it, and then it happens and you're like, oh, right, that's it. So it's a very jarring game that you move or do something, and then your opponent just can use some different combination of special abilities and stratagems to screw you over. So he dropped 2 of his hand-to-hand monsters behind my lines after I had moved. So it's like, all right, well, fine, we'll just go forward. So I did move, and I did shoot. I rolled pretty good, and I wiped out one of his Terminator squads here. So I basically unloaded all 3 of my guys into these Terminators. They're pretty tough, but I did manage to kill them. So I did. He just has his leader left. At this point, I charged the Purgations and the Terminator. So now I've got 1 Terminator squad here, and then another Terminator squad. And so my plan is, my thought is at least, I should be able to just kill these units. Including my leader, right? I've got my leader here too. So the first thing that he did is he used the stratagem to give his sisters the ability to fight first. So even though I charged, he used the stratagem. And this is actually a standard stratagem to say, no, I as the defender get to attack first, even though you charged me. So his sisters, again, they get to roll that. They rolled a hit, and they rolled and then they rolled to wound, and every 4-up was 2 mortal wounds. And so he just, before I even got a chance to attack, he killed more of my Terminators. So I did manage to attack back. Oh, the other thing he did is I'll get into this more, and it's so difficult to even explain all he did. But every phase, his detachment special rule lets him pick a new ability. So sometimes he was having me strike at -1 to hit. Sometimes he was giving himself exploding hits. Sometimes he was giving himself lethal hits. It's like their detachment rule lets them basically pick one of 3 rules. So it's very difficult to kind of follow exactly what's going on here. I did manage to kill some of these sisters, but not a lot. Remember, each of these sisters get a 3-up save against anything psychic. So this is a relatively cheap unit that is murdering my Terminators, and I just can't kill them because of that 3-up save. I did kill the Terminators, but I left his champion there, and his champion is a hand-to-hand monster. He also has some other rules that he's doing. And yeah, again, the same thing. I use I use the stratagem that lets me get mortal wounds on 6s, but he just has a 4-up save. So I did manage to kill these Terminators, but he also killed a lot more of my stuff as well. So, and remember, these are just 2 squads. These 2 squads are taking on 20 Terminators and a Purgation squad. So, yeah, quite fun. Bottom of turn 2. So it's looking, again, to go back here, it looks like I'm winning here, but I've had to devote so many resources, and these squads aren't even dead yet, that now he's coming in with the rest of his army. So he brings his bikes in. He then also brings up, so this is an entirely fresh new squad. I've just barely killed these 4 Terminators, haven't even touched the leader. He's bringing in an entire fresh squad coming into me. So yeah, they're coming in. That's just another picture. They actually do some shooting, but it doesn't really do a lot. And then they charge my Purgations. I'm pretty sure my Purgations are dead. My Spears also, his jet bikes had their spear attacks. They did a couple of wounds, and then they also charged my Terminators. That's just that one here. Yeah. And then he actually... this happened later, actually, but he forgot that he didn't need to make a battle shock test on this, and he did. And since he did, he lost the ability to give themselves stratagems, and so I ended up rolling and killing his leader. But his sisters, again, just kind of went back into me and just kind of killed more. He rolled pretty good, and I wasn't able to kill his sisters. And yeah, he did more damage to my terms. My Purgations were basically wiped out. Yeah, this is his sisters kind of going in, killing a few more Terminators. You can see there's 6 Terminators here. Those 2 sisters took out 3 Terminators. Like these 2 cheat models, and it's a character and 1 model left. They killed half. They killed this 3 Terminators. So it's these sisters are just brutal, and I still haven't even finished off the squad. His other Terminators went into my Purgations, killed 4 out of 5. Yeah, so top of 3, I don't have a lot to do. Like, this is my army that's left. So all I really can do is just fight, but here's the deal. Because I didn't charge, in 40k, the defender gets to always attack first. So that's a really odd rule that I don't want to even try to get into. But in 40k, your defender, whenever on your turn, the defender always gets to attack first. But if you charge, you get strike first. It's just confusing. It's hard to explain. Anyway, since he got to attack first, he just killed off my Purgation. And he also, I think I got to attack some of his bikes, but they're pretty tough. My leader went into his sisters, and I managed to kill one of the sisters, but his leader is still left, so she's going to go and murder the rest of the Terminators as well. In fact, she does. She kills one more of those Terminators. Yeah, going forward. Bottom of 3, well, we all know the writing's on the wall. He brings an entire fresh squad with a fresh leader into my Terminators. He actually brings his bikes back to capture the objectives. His 3-man squad actually shoot my Purgation, finishes that last one, and then they also charge. So this is 1 Terminator squad with a leader, and then a 2nd Terminator squad with another leader. And yeah, that's just another showing of it. And I mean, yeah, since he got to attack first, he just killed them all. And yeah, that was the game. So again, I want to. It's a total victory too, because I do want to, and I know I'm not giving it credit, but I really am glossing over so many abilities and stratagems that went on. I go back to it. 40k is a very difficult game to run a battle report on because there are so many combinations of things. Like, I was trying to put together something to show cards, but it's honestly just very difficult, and I didn't want to have to. I didn't want to have to deal with that. But needless to say, 40K as a new player to it is very overwhelming. So a learning points. I've got. I want to actually take a good look at 40K and kind of talk about it from a Kings of War perspective. Like, again, I haven't been in 40K or a GW game, and so when I looked at some of the rules that went on, some of this stuff was just bonkers to me. So much of, as a Kings of War player who tends to like streamline rules, I was in this, despite having an opponent who was very gracious, who was very patient with me, I was just absolutely overwhelmed with just, I mean, it was just so difficult to even go over some things. I'm not saying that 40K isn't, it can't be enjoyed. Didn't enjoy it. I think what something being enjoyable is subjective, right? I may not find this enjoyable, but at the same time, I can also see how players could enjoy it, and I'm going to get into that why. But let's talk about what I learned from 40K. The first thing I learned is that army and detachment rules are just, they vary drastically in power. I mean, some of them are situational and I think relatively balanced. Some are just absolutely broken. I mean, just overpowered. Like, and that's the real fascinating rule. I don't know. Like each army gets a. If this isn't confusing enough, each army gets an army-wide rule, but they also get a detachment rule. Now, right now, it's fine in that every army really only has one detachment, but keep in mind that in the future, each army will be getting 4 and 5 detachments. So, as confusing as this is now with all these layered rules, it's going to get much more as each of these armies are going to get multiple detachments and therefore multiple detachment rules. But I generally look at detachment rules are broken up into what I would say some are relatively balanced, some are just absolutely broken, and then some are just like, I'm going to go into one for Eldar, it's just badly designed. And I'm going to talk, it's not that it's broken, it's not that it's just badly designed. And I'm going to go into that. And I'm going to use the Grey Knights as a good example and just kind of talk about why I think that a lot of these armies were just developed completely in separate rooms. It's like the designers didn't even talk to each other because like there's just glaring holes in just the consistency of these army rules. So let's talk about Grey Knights. I think Grey Knights have an army rule and a detachment rule which are relatively balanced. So in the army rule, they have this teleport assault. Well, what they can do is based on this is an important thing I'm going to discuss later. But combat patrol, incursion, strike force, onslaught, this is representing different point levels. And based on the level of the battle you're playing, you can effectively, at the end of your opponent's turn, take those models off the field and then have them effectively deep strike somewhere else on the battle. It's actually a pretty cool ability. It is countered by the fact that anything in hand-to-hand can't do it. But it's a really interesting rule. I think their faction, the detachment rule, is teleport shunt, which basically says they don't have to roll a dice to advance. They just automatically advance 6 inches. Yeah, and that it gains fly in the sense that, so they can kind of teleport through terrain. It's a good rule. I don't think it's broken. Like I said, Grey Knights, having units run and not shoot it's very situational, but I think it's a pretty interesting and balanced rule. So I would say I like the Grey Knight special rules. Let's talk about the rules that I think are just broken, and that's Custodes. Now, I don't think if there's 40K players who are watching this, I think it's generally agreed on that Custodes are just definitely a more powerful faction. And part of what makes them so powerful is their army rule, which is basically a 4-up save against mortal wounds. Now, I don't like mortal wounds, as I've said. I think that the idea of playing a dice game means that you allow your players to roll dice to save. And I've honestly never understood how GW just said, let's add in a feature where people can't save. It's just, like I said, I've never quite understood why they introduced mortal wounds, but I think what makes it 3 times more annoying is that there is one faction that as an army-wide rule gets a feel no pain against mortal wounds. Everyone else that gets hit with a mortal wound just dies. And yet these guys get a 4-up save against them. It's just a really broken special rule. But on top of that, they have another special rule, this martial kata. I don't know if I'm pronouncing. In this phase, at the start of your fight phase, you get to pick 3 different stances. Now, this is just a incredibly powerful rule in that it's situational. You basically get to pick every turn whether you want to fight defensively and have your opponent hit at -1, whether you want to do sustain hits, which is basically explosion on 6s, or whether you want to do lethal hits, which automatically wound on 6s. So one is good for horde armies, one is good for tough armies, and one is good just as a defensive. And this is the sort of special rule which I think is bad, in that it's an always awesome sort of thing, right? So here is, I think, some examples of 2 rules that are just overpowered, right? They're just kind of broken. And then let's talk about Eldar and just their badly designed rules. So Eldar have an army-wide rule, which is Strands of Fate, and then Unparalleled Foresight. So Unparalleled Foresight, I think, is fine. It basically lets you reroll 1 to hit and wound dice on a unit. Every unit gets 1 reroll on to hit and wound. I think it's fine. It's not flavorful, but it's fine. But here is this Strands of Fate special rule. And what this rule, I'm going to summarize everything. What this rule basically does is you roll 12d6 at the start of the game. And throughout the game, so you basically get this pool of 12 dice. And you can reroll, if you don't like your dice, you can subtract 1 and reroll it again. Here's the deal. You're fishing for 6s. This rule is all about fishing for 6s. You're going to try to get 2 or 3 6s here. Throughout the game, instead of rolling a dice, you can grab one of those dice in your dice pool and substitute an attack. You can do that for advance rolls, battle shock tests, a charge roll, damage roll, hit roll, and a wound roll. Now, I won't get into the specific combo about that, but the big thing this rule does is it basically allows you to pick a series of weapons and to effectively destroy a unit without really rolling a lot, right? You can pick units that have explosions that do mortal wounds if you roll a 6, so you just apply that to your damage roll. You have weapons that have variable damage. You can D6 plus 2 or so. Well, you can just make that a 6 and it's doing like 8 damage. All of those are mortal wounds, that sort of stuff. What this rule really does, it really allows you to basically pick a unit and effectively, if not destroy that unit, to like heavily cripple it in a game. Now, the first thing that is, I think, whether this rule is broken or not, it's interesting to say that. What we can say about this rule, it's not linear. It doesn't scale. So here are the Grey Knights, their special rule. It's like the person who made this rule understood that this rule should be tied to the level of points you're playing, right? But the Eldar player didn't do that. And that's a really important thing. You only ever get 12 dice. And so what that means is the rule, if you're playing a lower point game, this rule is absolutely broken. Because in a lower point game, you have lower units, you have smaller units, and to be able to effectively take out or maim a unit in a 700, 1,000 point game is just game breaking, right? At that low points, you are effectively removing 20, 30% of their army without making any rolls. It's absolutely broken, right? And so in lower points, this rule is just broken. But yet at higher points, this rule sucks, right? It's so in a 1,500 point to maybe 750 to 1,500 point game, this rule I think is just broken. You basically can just automatically, without making any rolls, delete, if not permanently maim, like 10 to 20% of your opponent's army. But in a 3,000 to 4,000 point game, since this rule doesn't scale, you're only killing 5%. And so here is this rule which is so bad. And I actually play Eldar, but I see such a bad rule in which it's broken at lower points, but it's, I say, incredibly weak at higher points. It's like, why didn't they just look at what Grey Knights do? Why didn't they expand or subtract the dice pool based on the size? Like, it seems to me such an obvious thing to do. And they're doing it other places. Like, it's just, that's what I mean when we look at 40K. These rules are just designed, it seems, by completely different people. And like, they don't even seem to think about the blatantly obvious problem about this rule, right? And so I'm just like, this rule just honestly confuses me. I think it's just such a bad rule. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. So, all right. The next thing I want to talk about in 40K that's very different than Kings of War is Kings of War is really about units. It's about moving units around, and your units are very important. In 40K, it's all about stratagems and all about what I call feats. And I'm using the term feats, I'm borrowing that term from War Machine to really take into these once per battle special abilities that are powerful for one turn. And I'm just going to show you the Custodes army I faced and show you just some of the once per battle or once per battle turn. And that's the even confusing part about it. Some of this stuff is once per battle. Some of it's once per turn. And so it's so hard to follow. And the idea that you can combine all these once per battle special abilities with unit special abilities with free stratagems is just mind-boggling to even try and get around. The fact that multiple characters stacking their special ability, it means that armies. So in Kings of War, your army, your troops are very important to the game. But in 40K, a lot like War Machine, your troops are really more of vessels to channel these powers. Like I said, you can combine all these strategies and feats with detachment rules and army rules that can just drastically change what a unit can do, right? As I've said, it's War Machine writ large. If you like War Machine, it's War Machine on steroids. Whereas, in War Machine, you really only have one caster that can kind of, quote, do their once a battle feat. In this game, you can bring 5 characters, and each of those characters can have a feat. So you can pop 5 feats. It feels not like a war game. It feels like a card game that you are using these units to channel abilities through. It just doesn't feel like 40K does not feel like a war game to me. I want to give this is just some of the things, right? Where these are some of the characters he plays, and he's got, look at all the this is a once per battle round, which honestly, I got confused and I got frustrated. I'm like, wait, you already did that. That's a once per battle. And he's like, no, that's a once per battle round. And I'm like, oh, so you can do this once per battle round. And then here's another one. There's a once per battle, right? So I'm just showing you, I'm not going to go into detail, but each of these, right? This is the guy who did the once per battle. You can charge in advance. Here is an item they bought that does once per battle, right? You can, chase after someone. This unit also has a once per battle, right? Where once per battle they can basically gain a feel up for feel no pain, right? And so it's not just characters. Units also can have once per battles. Here the bikes have a once per battle where they do 2 mortal wounds, right? Once per battle, they can, as they charge someone, they can just do mortal wounds. Here's a once per battle, right? Where they can shoot again once per battle. You can just start seeing where all these units all have these once per battle abilities. Here's the stratagem that he was using that was subtracting my damage by 1. I just had to show that. It's just annoying. And so, that just goes into, I just wanted to show you briefly, like, all the once per battle stuff going on. I went into this before, but I'll talk about it again. units are developed in isolation from one another. So in my case, there's this unit called Vigilators, these girls, which I'll talk about. These were designed as a massive anti-psyker counters. And I think that this unit was balanced in the idea that armies are generally only going to have 1 or 2 psychers. And so this unit that has this 3-up invulnerable against psychics and that has a 4-up mortal wounds on psychics seems relatively balanced. But what happens? So here I imagine that's what they were thinking. But on the other side of the building, they were creating armies like Grey Knights that were all psychers. So this sort of thing is just like, I would say, poorly thought out. It's like pointed for a unit that's really meant down to hunt down specific models, right? These squad was very cheap, but they're pointed to hunt down specific models, and yet they were built in the idea that armies exist entirely of that type. So it just makes the unit broken against those armies, right? And this is the one that I'm talking about, right? Where they get a 3-up feel no pain against psychic attacks, which is all Grey Knights, like 90% of the stuff, just psychic attacks. And then they have these Great Blades, which does a Psyker 4-up. That means that on a 4-up, you do a critical hit. And Devastating Wounds, which says that every critical hit does a mortal wound. These guys do 2 damage. And what was happening is every 4-up he was rolling was doing 2 mortal wounds. So just absolutely murdering my Terminators because they're Psychers. And this is just this. So this is the special character, who also, by the way, has a once per battle. Why not? And then as well, they have the characters. So this is a very cheap unit that is just, again, built to be an anti-psyker and is absolutely broken against Grey Knights. So I don't think that you should be developing units like that here. All right, so I've went through a lot. I want to thank you guys for going through here. It's definitely it's really funny that coming from Kings of War, as I've said before, I think our community is much more sensitive to maybe balance, some balance differences, that I think that when we do go to a game like 40K, where the balance is just, to me, completely thrown out the window. Like, I saw 40K and I saw some other games being played, and just, to me, the balance is just imbalanced on a scale that I think that Kings of War just really can't comprehend. And so I appreciate everyone listening to me. Hey, I hope you had some good time. And if anything, I would say that this is a good opportunity that as we look at Kings of War, I know myself, I have complained about the balance in Kings of War, but this game has really given me a different perspective. And I've realized, that maybe our game isn't nearly as unbalanced as we think it is. So I definitely have a greater appreciation for Kings of War. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.